Hello there everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and today we'll be talking about external questioning and practical rationality. General arguments against external questioning tend to be too strong in the sense that just because you can say anything beyond a material existence isn't properly defined, it lacks cognitive content that allows it not always to be the case. One can argue from linguistic frameworks inside another framework. We have a moral obligation in the sense if reasons for an action exist and reasons for actions is something that does have a familiar content, but still, even with a reason to adopt a moral point of view, that would not be a reason to do what is in the moral standpoint. One can question morality from an external viewpoint by using practical rationality, which in of itself is not an institution, but rather is the framework which tells us what our reasons are for acting on something, and you can argue against reason without using it. It can't tell you what you ought to do, but it can come up with an answer of what can be done. There is a normative framework for giving and accepting things, aka practical rationality. For an instrumentalist rationale, an agent is practically rational to the extent they are guided by subjective reasons. Agent is rational for drinking a cup of water when they're thirsty as long as it matches that of their ideal self, aka what they would do if having every idealized circumstances. What makes a belief irrational isn't so much the content but the way it is arrived at. An old false belief isn't irrational if the error is understandable, but even a true belief that comes from a faulty reasoning is still irrational. What a non-Humean theory of normative reasons puts forward is that an agent has a normative reason to do X, even if they don't desire what X brings about. Practical reasoning comes into play as it puts forward that a person has reasons to do X because doing so would be the best in some way for the person's motivational set. Having the ability to deliberately process things can lead someone to see a belief as false and thus have no reason to do it and to not take certain temptations. A person can have a rational desire to refrain from doing X, but at the same time an irrational desire to do X. It may be the case that in both cases she has desires for both, but because the former comes from a place of rationality, it beats the other. This can come from a more subjectivist standpoint as the agent can be justified in believing it as it would satisfy her rational desires. A person is rational to the extent they are guided by their subjective reasons. Practical reasoning pertains to what we desire with the beliefs we have, and it doesn't require the agent is correct. Expecting a truth of morality is like expecting there to be a truth in one person's favorite color. There is no truth about the favorite color of fully informed and deliberating agent, as merely would be fully informed and having a full capacity for deliberation doesn't produce desires. We do, however, have institutional reasons, aka reasons that make sense in adherence to inside an institution. Practical rationality yields non-institutional reasons because to question practical rationality is self-undermining. Practical rationality consists of an agent doing what is guided by their own subjective reasons, which they have a reason to do so because of having a justification that an action would get them there. An external claim is one that is applied to the subject regardless of desires. Normatively, for something to be a reason, it has to potentially be able to explain the actions. Like to give an external reason refraining from eating meat because it happens to be taboo, it would be truth independent of what I thought of it, and regardless of my desires, I have a reason not to think. But how this external reason explained my internal reasoning is that I believe that eating meat is taboo. The external reason must have a causally effective role in the action. Now the belief, however, in of itself doesn't produce action, but an action coupled with desires does so. If I believe that eating meat is taboo, but if me caring about that won't stop me from eating meat. External reasons like institutional reasons can be accepted so it doesn't all have to be internalized. My only issue is with external reasons that claim to transcend all institutions. We may say that a person morally ought to act in a certain manner. We are implying that there is some transcendent reason to do that action regardless of desires and interests when there is no such reasons. Moral judgments are untrue not just because they ascribe reasons to people who have no reasons, but also to people who have reasons to as counterfactual situations are in order. One may ask, why do we employ certain strong imperatives, and what has led people to commit said error in moral reasoning? The reason for this is natural selection, as we've evolved to organize the world into moral concepts in order to help better survive and propagate our species. We don't just desire things we feel like we ought to desire those things. We feel a sense of regret when we fail to act to satisfy a desire, and this shouldn't be confused with guilt, as guilt is when someone believes they acted in a way they shouldn't have. Also, one must recognize that this sympathy we have with others doesn't constitute a moral sense, but rather just regret over unsatisfied desires, but our language just makes it seem like we ought not to do something. Merely disliking an action doesn't make a moral system, as even primates exhibit that. As gone over, this moral sense is attributed to God, but actually comes from evolution. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.